Speaking of Numerian, I think he's unrankable because, from what I know of his reign consists of marching back to Nicomedia and then being discovered that he's been dead for several weeks.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. The only thing down is he extracted the army from Persia, but it's not like they were defeated, so it's not
Yeah,
that much of an achievement.
yeah,
Yeah, he might have to be unrankable.
just covered the logistical challenge of getting his army out of Mesopotamia, which could be difficult, as Julian the Apostate found out.
Yeah, we're not really told that it was a particularly difficult withdrawal, so
No,
yeah, I'm inclined to be unrankable.
yeah,
Which leaves Carinus.
yeah. I know he gets a rather negative write-up in the sources. He's displayed as a violent, lazy, drunkard or such, a bit of a womanizer as well, and wastes his time in the west. Pyrrhus was away in the east fighting the Persians. Diocletian propaganda campaign is probably to do with that, but he seems to have been successful in that you don't hear of any usurpers or anything like that. The only issue is Diocletian is proclaimed emperor by the army after Numerian's found dead, and then Carinus marches to meet him, and then at the Battle of the Margus, it's a bit hit and miss who's actually winning until part of Carinus' army defects, his Praetorian prefect betrays him, and he is murdered, ending the civil conflict. But I don't know, it's difficult. It's like maybe he wasn't enough to inspire confidence in his army, but at the same time it could have just been opportunism by his Praetorian prefect. So
His relationship with Valerian is kind of this. Sorry, with Carus, it's this microcosm of Gallienus and Valerian in a way, because he's the emperor left to deal with all the other issues in the empire, while his father heads east and then dies in unfortunate circumstances. Yeah, it is very difficult to get a real grasp of Carinus because Diocletianic propaganda is making a big effort against him. And that's going to be adopted by subsequent emperors because the Constantinians come out of that tetrarchic regime, and then the Constantinian regime is there for a very long time. And so that's a long time for Carinus to be established, for it to be established as fact that Carinus was an absolute tyrant.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's very unfairly vilified, it seems. And we can, at the very least, so we don't have many details. We can see from his laws that he's moving back and forth between Gaul and Britain and Italy. So he's certainly active. And we know that he took the cognomina Germanicus and Britannicus. So he was fighting campaigns, and he seems to have been in Gaul actually when his brother died. Because, I mean, it looks like there's a bit of debate about whether these were two usurpers or one usurper, but when Carus died, apparently there was the governor of Dalmatia, Aurelius Julianus, usurped, and Carinus had to defeat him. Then a different Julianus, a Sabinus Julianus, the Praetorian prefect, when he heard that Numerian had died and Diocletian had taken over in the east, he also decided to usurp, and he usurped in northern Italy. Carinus marched south and defeated Sabinus Julianus at Verona, the same place where Philip was defeated by Decius, because I guess it was such a strategically important node along the roads. Likewise, Maxentius and Constantine, Maxentius' army and Constantine would fight at that location. And then he marched east to deal with Diocletian, who by that time had received the support of Egypt and was entering the Balkans himself. And yes, they fought on the Margus. So up to that point, Carinus seems to have defeated various Germans and maybe Picts and one or two usurpers, depending on whether there's one or two usurpers named Julianus. But yes, there's actually an indication, as you say, in the sources that he appears to have been doing, there's vague references to him doing reasonably well against Diocletian until his army deserted him. that sort of spelled the end. He was deserted by part of his army, and I mean the sources give varying details, but a convincing reconstruction I saw was that the army rebelled. Part of the army rebelled at the Margus, and then he fled to the west to a fortress, to a little Danube fort called Cornacum, which was where he was then cut down by one of his tribunes. And we know from Aurelius Victor that, as you say, his new Praetorian prefect, after Sabinus Julianus had rebelled against him, he appointed a new Praetorian prefect, Aristobulus, who was then retained in his command by Diocletian for, to quote Aurelius Victor, the services he had rendered. So it sounds like he betrayed Carinus as well. And actually, Constantius, the father of Constantine, may have been involved in all of this, because he named his eldest son to Maximian's stepdaughter Theodora. So he had his son Constantine, but then he had a bunch of sons to Theodora. And the eldest of those sons was named Dalmatius, and we know he was the governor of Dalmatia at the time. And in the Balkans, that would be, a useful place to show your loyalty to Diocletian during a Balkan campaign between Diocletian and Carinus.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a whole lot of people betrayed poor Carinus. And probably that doesn't necessarily, maybe, I don't think there's any shame in being an inferior politician to Diocletian, because Diocletian, as we'll get to, is
The master
pretty
politician.
Exactly. And so the fact that he could defeat you by causing you to just hemorrhage all your supporters isn't necessarily a reflection on the badness of Carinus, but just how good Diocletian is at politics. Interestingly, a very recent article that came out just this year, the scholar Brian Rose argues that the Arch of Constantine in Rome, the frieze depicting the Battle of the Milvian Bridge on that arch, he argues fairly persuasively, is actually a depiction of the Battle of the Margus. And it was reused by the people making that arch for Constantine. There might actually be this prominent depiction of this otherwise little-known battle on the Arch of Constantine in the middle of Rome. Because I guess it would have been Diocletian's Actium, or his Milvian Bridge. It would have been an important battle for him. But yeah, I think Carinus I regard as a decent emperor.
I'm just wondering about why so many people wanted to betray Carinus. I mean, it is the 3rd century, so it's not exactly surprising, but I do wonder if, although he was apparently effective in the West, if his personality didn't quite match up to his abilities. Because, okay, you do have the Diocletianic propaganda, but typically use things that were already there, exacerbate them. Maybe things like having his school bullies executed and stuff like that is maybe a grain of truth to it. I don't know. It could be Diocletianic propaganda, but at the same time, why would he point out these things rather than just doing the usual, he was lazy, slept around and stuff like that? Maybe just speculating, but
yeah, I think I suppose it depends on the source, because I know a lot of these claims are the Historia Augusta, and that's just such a bizarre source that it's very difficult to know what to use within it.
I think it's also Eutropius, and it may be a Kaisergeschichte.
All right, well, so then maybe there is some element of truth, because I know that the claim given, for example, for why the tribune killed him was that he was sleeping with the tribune's wife, and so maybe that's true as well. Although then again, being rapacious with women is a trope of tyrants in the Roman world.
Yeah,
it's very difficult to. I guess that's a fair point, though, that if Diocletian is able to cause such a slew of defections, it doesn't reflect well on Carinus, certainly.
I think if you also, again, it is kind of just based on speculation, but if you flip it the other way, Diocletian is the usurper. Why was he able to succeed where Saturninus or Jopatian and people like that failed in their usurpations against the clearly legitimate Emperor Carinus?
Yes, sure. No, it's a fair point, and I think probably the answer, probably the answer lies somewhere between. There were probably issues with Carinus, and also Diocletian was a step up from the likes of Jatapianus in terms of just being posing a formidable threat. That clearly he was just good at politics.
Yeah.
In a way that many of these usurpers
Were not.
were, I guess, average to not. Yeah. Maybe mediocre is better, because I think he did clearly. I mean, he was capable of defeating usurpers and Germans.
I will err on the side of caution and put him in mediocre. But again, I think the trouble is we know so little, which is kind of verifiably fact about him, that it's really difficult to tell either way.
So I suppose if he won some victory over the Franks or the Alemanni that was in some way comparable to the victories of Probus or Aurelian, I guess one of the issues is Diocletianic sources would
suppress it. Yeah.
Yeah, that no one trying to receive imperial patronage during those 21 years of Diocletian's rule or the years afterwards are going to bring that up. But yeah. I guess that does mean that we don't have a lot to work with. Yes.
Right.
So I agree.
That is the 3rd century emperors before Diocletian. Next time we'll talk about the First Tetrarchy. I hope you've enjoyed listening to our talk about all of the emperors. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Byron, for coming on.
Yes, no, it's been a lot of fun.
And this has been Eastern Roman History.